Hi again. So with this video, I'm going to start explaining the pieces that that I built to make this online service, and we're going to begin with the development environment. So we're going to go with these videos. We're going to go through my GitHub repository. So this specific project can be found at github.com rtmkv kaboom-dev-environment, and this is all about setting up the dev environment so it can be easy to start development. So if I open this project in the Visual Studio Code, well, you see this is a Vagrant file. So my biggest worry in the beginning was to just have Kafka and MongoDB installed and configured on my machine so that I could run the queries against those systems. So I could, of course, just have installed it simply on my machine and just would be fine with that. But I decided to bring it more to the actual situation when it would be multiple developers working on the same project. And if you force every developer on the same project just to install Kafka and MongoDB on their machine, it can be many systems to install. It can be multiple things to configure. You might run into the conflicts of versions, so that people would install different versions, not what something that you installed, and basically to avoid all those problems, it's much easier to just prepare the Vagrant file that would just start the environment for you. So while I'm explaining what I did here, I was just going to bring the command line here just to start Vagrant up, and that's going to start building my environments. So while it's going through this process, so let's go quickly through the Vagrant file. So what I have here, I'm going to use the VirtualBox as the driver for my virtual machines, and I'm going to give 2 GB of memory and 1 CPU to each virtual machine. So I'm going to have 2 virtual machines, one for running MongoDB, one for Kafka. Decided to separate those. It's not necessary, could have been on the same machine, but just decided to separate those. So we're going to have one machine that is called MongoDB. Is going to be based on a Ubuntu Bionic 64. That's a 18.01, I believe, version of Ubuntu. So here I defined the IP addresses from my private subnet to assign to those machines. Since MongoDB is communicating on port 27017, so I'm going to open that up so that I could access Mongo on just localhost and the same port. And here I'm running the Bootstrap shell script that basically is just going to install MongoDB and configure it the way I want it. And in the end here, I'm also running the script that just creates the database. So basically it creates the necessary collections and indexes in that MongoDB. So similar thing for Kafka. I'm just having the different IP address for Kafka. I'm opening up the ports for that requires to connect to Kafka itself and to for the Zookeeper. Again, I'm also I'm running this Bootstrap shell script that installs Kafka if it's not installed, and so on. And I have this script that creates the topic in Kafka. So I need two. I'm going to be using 2 topics, one for start events and one for crash events. And and I also have this trigger here. When I shut down the Kafka machine, I'm just going to run the script that stops Kafka. So if I go a bit inside of those directories, so let's go and look at Kafka. So I have this Bootstrap shell script. So basically, the inside of it, I have the commands that install all the necessary requisites. So I installed Java 8. OpenSDK, I install Scala, I download the Kafka itself, unzip it and put it in a user local bin Kafka folder. So basically all of those things, I just went through the official instructions how to install Kafka on the website on the Kafka website, and just basically build my script based on that. One thing though I do well specifically for myself, so I just want that Kafka, when it runs, all the log files with the possible errors, I don't want them to be located just on that virtual machine. I want them to be accessible from my host machine. So for that, I have this Kafka logs folder under my Kafka folder in Vagrant. So all the log files go here, and I can just open one of them and see if if Kafka failed to start. I can see, for example, here what's going on. So to make that possible, I define the symbolic link. So basically, I'm creating this the folder under Vagrant folder. So basically, with Vagrant folder is the folder that's mapped on the current folder from where you start the Vagrant environment. And I point and the user local bean Kafka logs is typically assuming that I installed the Kafka in this user local bean Kafka folder. User local bean Kafka logs folder would be the folder where Kafka would write all the log files. So I'm removing that one, and instead I'm creating the symbolic link to my Vagrant, to my Kafka logs folder under Vagrant. So this makes sure that all the log files are accessible on host machine as well. So I'm also installing Kafka Cat. Kafka Cat is super useful to diagnose Kafka. I'm going to run it later when I will show you how I set up Kafka as a cluster. But it's actually, this is a tool that just saved me so much time, and yeah, it's very useful. So then I'm copying the Kafka, the config file of Kafka that I just pre-created here. So the server properties. So basically here I'm saying that I'm going to listen. So the most important properties here is the listeners. So I'm saying that I'm going to listen on all interfaces that this allows me to connect. So when I'm on a host machine and I connect to Kafka using localhost and this 9092 port, Kafka is getting those requests because it's listening. It's set up to listen on all interfaces. And it also advertises back the localhost URL. So with this setup, you don't need to modify any host file on your host machine. So this is something that people do to make sure that they are able to connect on the local host. With this setup, it's really not necessary to modify your host file. So you just need this to be listening all interfaces and return localhost. So I copied that file where the Kafka is expecting it, and I'm also starting Zookeeper and starting Kafka. And I have this extra script that I'm creating the topics. So I'm creating the topic launch event and the crash event. So basically those topics will be used to store my events that I get from the mobile application. So in this particular setup, I'm using a replication factor of 1 because I just have one instance of Kafka running. That's for development environment, it's fine. So for the test environment, which is closer to production, I'm going to show you how I configure it with the replication factor of 2 in actually 2 instances of Kafka running. So, but that's it for Kafka. For MongoDB, it's very similar. So I have this bootstrap shell that just uses the instructions that I copied from the official MongoDB site that explain how to install MongoDB. And I have this script that triggers, so runs this JavaScript to create a database. And creating database is basically, puts there some fake application code that I could use for testing already in the applications collection, and also creates the indexes for various other collections to have a more realistic setup. And again, I have this Mongo config file that I copy copy on that virtual machine. And again, I bind on 0.0.0.0. This is basically just to say again that I'm going to listen to all interfaces, and this again allows me to connect from host machine using the local host URL to Mongo. And the same as with Kafka, I also want MongoDB to write all the log files in a folder that is mapped to my folder on a host machine. So again, I can diagnose if there is any problem running MongoDB. And again, as with Kafka, I just removing the actual actual folder when the log files written by MongoDB, and I'm creating a symbolic link to map this folder that MongoDB is using to my folder on the under background. And that's basically it. That's basically what I set up to have my development environment. And if I look here, so yeah, it's all run. So I'm running background status, and I see that I have 2 machines running, one with MongoDB, one with Kafka, and I could actually try to connect. Let's do Mongo. I think it's MongoD. Mongo, is that Mongo? And that's Mongo. So now I'm connected to Mongo, and you see I didn't specify anything, so by default it's going to be localhost. So, and I'm actually now connected to my virtual machine, my MongoDB in a virtual machine. So that's it for this video. So in the next video I'm going to go through the I'm going to start speaking about actual projects that the services are built from. So I hope to see you next time, and bye.